Happy to be here today, and having listened to distinguished Professor Mimiko and Professor Akinyeye. I think Professor Mimiko has given us a very good background to this discussion. Yeah, the purpose of this colloquium is to rub minds on the war between Russia and Ukraine, and then the implication of the war itself. And let me take it from where Professor Akinyeye stopped. You know, of course, Professor Akinyeye has mentioned to us that it's very difficult, really, to actually say that this is likely to be what will be the outcome of the war, if really there is going to be an end to the war, or that Ukraine will cease to exist. But then he has given two perspectives to it. That, of course, Ukraine as it is, because of the threat of contiguity that Ukraine seemed to pose to Russia, no country, none of the superpowers would tolerate that, because NATO is expanding eastward and the eastern border of Russia, and Russia is threatened politically, economically. So, in other words, if we look at that, we say it is in the right order that Russia is trying to protect its national interest. In the course of protecting its national interest, Russia is violating, appears to be violating the Charter of the United Nations. That is a threat on the sovereignty of the Ukrainian people. But having said this, I am coming from this perspective that the global world itself is ruled by deceit. International system is driven by deceit. That is the fear of unknown. And ever since the United Nations Charter was established in 1945, after the Second World War, the custodians of the veto powers themselves have been violating that charter, all in the name of national interest. And that is exactly the same thing that is playing out now between Russia and Ukraine. But someone also mentioned the issue of Taiwan and China. The threat is everywhere globally. But then, to allow Professor Akinyeye, there has to be concession. Ukraine, there has to be peace agreements. There has to be concession on the part of Ukraine. Ukraine must demilitarize, especially the aspect of the nuclear weapon. There has to be concession on that. And then the Black Sea, of course, is also of very important economic, strategic location for Russia. And so whatever threatens the economy of a country threatens every other thing. And of course, we see that manifesting already with the small explosions that we have witnessed in the past few days that the war started. Already, we begin to see the manifestation, the implications on the world economy itself. Because the Black Sea is just like the artery, you know, physiologically human make, you know, the way the artery is to the axe, you know. And so, causing any problem on the Black Sea is like trying to put a stop to the economic strength, even of Russia itself. And so, when you look at that, those two things, the contiguity of Ukraine to Russia, and the Black Sea, the importance of the Black Sea to Russia itself, and then the position of Russia. Russia, it will be a kind of a slap for Russia as one of the superpowers to allow a territory to be surrounded by enemies. And so there has to be concessions. If there are concessions, if Ukraine can demilitarize, agree not to, to build nuclear weapons or whatsoever, there will definitely be peace. There is likely to be peace. Ukraine will not cease to exist. But then, there is one major implication again, because you have to look at the implication. And I am coming from the humanitarian dimension, humanitarian crisis. We all know that all wars do no one any good, regardless of where it is fought, regardless of the race involved, regardless of the geographical location. All wars do no one any good. All wars do no one any good. And so the humanitarian crisis, for how long do we continue to have refugees? For how long do we continue to have women and children suffering? That is where I am coming. It has started manifesting. The United Nations, in one of its reports, made us to understand that 1.5 million children had fled Ukraine. 1.5 million children had fled Ukraine. But Moving is not even the issue, but we are now saying out of these 1.5 million children, do you know that just about a week ago, 500 of them, minors, were seen trying to cross the Romanian border unaccompanied minors. And of course, that in itself will generate humanitarian crisis. They are vulnerable to being trafficked. They are vulnerable to trauma. They are vulnerable. So you look at it that way. Children, what about women? Women are prone to gender-based humanitarian crisis. Physical, mental, and reproductive health. We have seen that manifesting already. This is one area that we don't seem to take cognizance of. Yes, we talk, oh, there is war everywhere, people will die. But of course, we have to look at those who suffer most, the children and the women. Why? If you look at Ukraine now, what is on ground is that if you are of the age of between 18 and 60, men stay back. They are likely to be conscripted into the army. But that for the women and children, you are free to escape. You are free to move, to run from the war zone, but run to where? Families have been what? Have been separated. And so that in itself spells dooms for the global world. And like, quoting United Nations warned recently that if proper care is not taken, the world may be going to witness one of the largest humanitarian crises in the world. So on this note, I want to